tomb was empty, and no one knew what to do with that reality. It was the first day of the week, still dark, still cold, still carrying the weight of everything that had happened 3 days earlier. Mary Magdalene came to the garden with spices in her hands and a grief too deep for words. What she found when she arrived was not the body she had come to tend. The stone had been moved. The entrance stood open. The silence of the tomb spoke of an absence that should not have been possible. And in that moment, without yet understanding it, without even having the language to name it, she became the first person in human history to stand before the evidence of the resurrection. She did not know it yet. She ran to find the disciples and spoke with the only explanation she could form. "They have taken the Lord out of the tomb, and we do not know where they have laid him." But even as she spoke those words, God had already begun to unfold the most extraordinary chapter the world would ever witness. There is something most people do not pause to consider when they think about the resurrection of Jesus. The appearances of the risen Lord were not uniform events. They did not follow a pattern, nor were they announced with signs in the sky or heralded by messengers calling crowds to gather. They came quietly, unexpectedly, and often in deeply personal moments. Each encounter carried a kind of humanity that unsettled precisely because it came from one who had crossed the boundary no human being had crossed before and returned. Jesus appeared in a garden, on a dusty road, behind closed doors, by the shore of a lake at dawn, in a room filled with fear. And in every appearance, something irreversible took place within those who saw him. Mary, who had come to the tomb weeping, left the garden running to proclaim what she had seen. The disciples, who had locked themselves away in fear, would soon step out and speak without fear to anyone. What they encountered changed everything they were. To understand the weight of these appearances, it is necessary to first understand the condition of Jesus' followers in those hours before they began. From their perspective, the Friday of the crucifixion had been the end of everything. Not only the death of their teacher, but the collapse of every hope they had built over 3 years. They had left their nets, their homes, their families, their professions, convinced that Jesus was the Messiah who would restore the kingdom of Israel. Now, he was dead, buried, sealed behind a stone, under Roman guard. Saturday passed in silence. They were paralyzed by grief and fear, knowing that those who had crucified Jesus also knew who his followers were. They were hidden, they were broken. Some had already begun to leave, returning to the lives they had once abandoned, because there no longer seemed to be any reason to remain. It was precisely in that condition of complete desolation that Jesus began to appear. The first recorded appearance took place in the garden, and its recipient was Mary Magdalene. That detail alone carries profound significance. In the Jewish culture of the first century, the testimony of a woman was not considered legally valid in court. If the story of the resurrection had been invented, no one would have chosen a woman as its first witness. Yet the account preserves this detail without adjustment, as if it could not be altered, because it simply happened that way. Mary stood outside the tomb, weeping. She saw 2 angels in white, seated where the body of Jesus had been. Then she turned and saw someone standing there, but she did not recognize him. She assumed he was the gardener. And then, something happened that deserves careful attention. Jesus spoke her name, only her name, Mary. In that instant, she recognized him, not by his appearance, but by his voice, by the way he spoke her name in a way no one else ever had. John records the moment with a simplicity that carries its own weight. He said, "Mary," and she turned and answered, "Rabboni," which means teacher. 2 words. 2 words that changed the course of the world. To follow the thread of these appearances faithfully, we must linger on what happened later that same day, along a road leading away from Jerusalem. It was the afternoon of that first Sunday. 2 disciples were walking toward a village called Emmaus, about 7 miles from the city. One of them was named Cleopas. The other remains unnamed, as if to leave space for the reader to walk that road as well. Their steps were heavy, their conversation filled with sorrow. Everything they had hoped for had come undone, and they were already moving away from the place where those hopes had died. As they walked and spoke together, a stranger drew near and began to walk with them. Luke describes the moment with a quiet precision. Their eyes were kept from recognizing him. This was not a failure of perception. It was something allowed, even arranged, for reasons that would unfold as they continued. The stranger asked them what they were discussing, and they stopped, surprised that anyone could be unaware of what had happened in Jerusalem in those days. "Are you the only visitor who does not know?" they asked, and he answered with another question. What things? What followed on that road stands as one of the most remarkable moments ever recorded. Without yet revealing himself, Jesus began to explain. Starting with Moses and continuing through all the prophets, he opened the scriptures to them, showing what had always been written concerning him. The author of those scriptures walked beside them on a dusty road, explaining their meaning to two men who did not yet know who he was. As he spoke, something began to happen within them. Their hearts were stirred, quietly set alight, though they could not yet explain why. By the time they reached Emmaus, the stranger seemed ready to continue on, but they urged him to stay. "Remain with us," they said, "for it is toward evening, and the day is now far spent." He went in with them, and when they sat at the table, he took the bread, blessed it, broke it, and gave it to them. In that moment, within that familiar gesture, their eyes were opened. They recognized him, and he vanished from their sight. They looked at one another and said, "Did not our hearts burn within us while he talked to us on the road, while he opened the scriptures to us?" Without hesitation, they rose that very hour and returned to Jerusalem, retracing the same road in the darkness, driven now not by sorrow, but by something entirely different. It is here that something deeper must be understood. The body of the risen Jesus was not simply a body restored to life in the way Lazarus had been raised. Lazarus returned to the same condition he had before and would one day die again. What Jesus possessed after the resurrection was something altogether different, a body that belonged to a new order of existence. The appearances themselves reveal this with quiet consistency. Mary did not recognize him at first. The disciples on the road walked with him for hours without knowing who he was. Those by the lake at dawn did not identify him from the shore. And yet, this same body bore the marks of the nails. This same body could be touched. This same body would eat in the presence of his disciples. It was real, physical, tangible, and at the same time, it was not bound by the same limitations. He could appear suddenly in a room with the doors closed and depart just as suddenly. The resurrection was not a metaphor, nor a shared spiritual experience. It was an event that brought into the world a kind of life the world had never seen before. That same evening, something happened that would reshape the identity of the disciples gathered in Jerusalem. They were together, the doors closed, locked out of fear. Cleopas and his companion had already returned, bringing with them the account of what had happened on the road. Their words were still being spoken, still being processed, when suddenly, without the sound of any door opening, Jesus stood among them. There was no warning, no transition. He was simply there, and his first words were not explanation, not correction, not rebuke. "Peace be with you." The reaction was immediate. They were startled, even terrified, thinking they were seeing a spirit. Jesus answered that fear not with argument, but with an invitation. "Look at my hands and my feet, that it is I myself. Touch me and see. A spirit does not have flesh and bones as you see that I have." And as he spoke, he showed them his hands and his feet. There is something deeply steady in this moment. He does not demand belief. He does not overwhelm them. He meets their fear directly, allowing them to see, to approach, to come to recognition in their own time. Even then, the text says they still struggled to believe, not because of doubt alone, but because of joy, because what stood before them exceeded what they had allowed themselves to hope. So he did something unexpected. He asked them for food. They gave him a piece of broiled fish, and he took it and ate in front of them. There, in that room with the doors still closed, in the quiet of that evening, the risen Jesus sat among them and ate, not as a vision, not as an idea, but as someone fully present. It grounded the moment. It made what they were witnessing impossible to dismiss. Yet one of them was not there, Thomas. His absence that night would become the setting for one of the most remembered encounters of all. When the others told him what they had seen, he answered with words that have followed him through history. "Unless I see the mark of the nails in his hands, and place my finger into the mark of the nails, and place my hand into his side, I will not believe." It is easy to reduce Thomas to disbelief, to define him by that single moment. But what he asked for was not something different from what the others had already received. They had seen, they had heard, they had been invited to touch. He asked for the same. 8 days later, the disciples were again inside, and this time Thomas was with them. The doors were closed, just as before, and again, Jesus came and stood among them. "Peace be with you." Then he turned to Thomas. There is no record that anyone had repeated Thomas's words to him, and yet he spoke directly to them, as if nothing had been hidden. Put your finger here and see my hands. Bring your hand and place it in my side. Do not be unbelieving, but believing. The text does not say whether Thomas actually touched him. It records only his response. My Lord and my God. In that moment, what had been hesitation gave way to recognition, and recognition to confession. Jesus answered him with words that reach beyond that room, beyond that time. Because you have seen me, you have believed. Blessed are those who have not seen, and yet have believed. The appearances did not remain within Jerusalem, nor were they confined to those first hours. There was another moment, quieter in its setting, yet no less revealing in what it carried. It took place in Galilee, by the Sea of Tiberias, and it comes to us with a level of detail that feels closely remembered, almost as if counted and held onto over time. 7 disciples were there: Simon Peter, Thomas, Nathanael, the sons of Zebedee, and 2 others. They had gone fishing. It is difficult to miss what that suggests. After everything that had happened, after the confusion and the reports and the glimpses of something they could not yet fully grasp, they returned to what they had once known. They spent the night on the water and caught nothing. At daybreak, a figure stood on the shore. Though they did not recognize it, he called out to them, "Children, do you have any fish?" They answered, "No." He said, "Cast the net on the right side of the boat, and you will find some." They did as he said, and the net filled, so full that they were not able to draw it in. It was in that moment that recognition came not through appearance, but through something familiar in the act itself. The Lord, the disciple whom Jesus loved, said quietly to Peter, and Peter, hearing those words, did not wait. He gathered his outer garment around him and threw himself into the sea, moving toward the shore with a kind of urgency that did not calculate distance. The others followed in the boat, bringing the net with them. When they reached the land, they found a fire already prepared, with fish laid upon it and bread beside it. Jesus spoke to them as one who had been waiting. "Bring some of the fish that you have just caught." Peter went back to the boat and drew the net ashore. It was full 153 large fish. The number is recorded without explanation, as though it had been counted, remembered, and never forgotten. And still, the net had not torn. Jesus said to them, "Come and have breakfast." None of them asked who he was. They knew there are moments when recognition no longer needs to be spoken. He took the bread and gave it to them, and the fish as well. There, at the edge of the water, in the quiet of the morning, the risen Jesus shared a meal with those who had once followed him, then fled, then returned without quite knowing what to do with themselves. And after they had eaten, something more took place. He turned to Peter. "Simon, son of John, do you love me more than these?" Peter answered, "Yes, Lord. You know that I love you. Feed my lambs." Again he asked, "Simon, son of John, do you love me?" "Yes, Lord. You know that I love you. Tend my sheep." A third time he asked, "Simon, son of John, do you love me?" By the third question, Peter was grieved, not because he did not understand, but because he did. "Lord, you know everything. You know that I love you. Feed my sheep." There is a quiet symmetry here that does not draw attention to itself, yet it cannot be missed. 3 denials, 3 questions, 3 affirmations. Jesus did not ignore what had happened. He did not pretend it had not taken place. He brought Peter back through it not with accusation, but with a question that reached deeper than failure. And then he gave him a charge. "Follow me." That is what the risen Jesus does in these appearances. He does not only show himself, he calls, he restores, he entrusts, he sends. Each encounter moves forward, not backward, towards something that will now be carried by those who have seen him and cannot remain as they were before. The appearances of Jesus did not end with the small circle gathered in rooms or along the shore. They extended further, reaching beyond the immediate group of disciples into moments that carried a different kind of weight, moments that touched the broader fabric of the early community. One of these is mentioned by Paul in his first letter to the Corinthians. He writes with a simplicity that does not try to persuade through argument, but rather points to something already known: that Christ died for our sins according to the Scriptures, that he was buried, that he was raised on the 3rd day, and that he appeared first to Cephas, then to the 12, and after that to more than 500 brothers at one time. He adds, almost in passing, that many of them were still alive. There is something steady in the way this is said, It does not read like a distant tradition being repeated. It sounds closer to a reminder, as if those who heard it could, if they wished, go and speak to those who had been there. The number itself is not emphasized. It is simply given. More than 500. A gathering large enough that what was seen was not confined to a single perspective, nor shaped by a single voice. It stands as a quiet expansion of the testimony, from individuals to small groups, to a multitude who shared the same encounter. After that, Paul says, he appeared to James. This moment carries a different kind of significance. James, the brother of Jesus, had not believed during the years of Jesus' ministry. The Gospels do not conceal this. They speak of it plainly, that even those closest to him did not understand, did not accept what he claimed. And yet, after the resurrection, James stands in a different place altogether. He is no longer outside, observing with distance. He becomes a central figure in the community in Jerusalem, recognized even by Paul as a pillar among them. The text does not describe the meeting itself. It does not tell us what was said. It simply records that it happened. But the change that followed speaks with its own clarity. To move from disbelief to leadership, from distance to commitment in a way that would eventually cost him his life, suggests something more than persuasion. It suggests an encounter that could not be set aside. In time, James would remain in Jerusalem, and there he would die, holding to the testimony that his brother, whom he had seen die, was alive again. Paul himself stands within this same pattern, though his experience comes differently. He describes it with a kind of restraint, as something that does not quite fit the sequence of the others. Last of all, he says, "As to one untimely born, he appeared also to me." At the time of that appearance, Paul was not searching. He was moving in the opposite direction. He was convinced that those who followed Jesus were in error, and he had taken it upon himself to act against them, to pursue, to imprison, to bring an end to what he saw as a threat. And yet, on the road to Damascus, something interrupted that course. A light, a voice, a question that reached him where he stood. "Saul, Saul, why are you persecuting me?" "Who are you, Lord?" "I am Jesus." There is no elaboration beyond what is needed. The moment stands on its own. From that point forward, the direction of his life changed. The one who had opposed became one who would carry the message further than most. The one who had sought to silence became one who would speak, write, and endure for the sake of what he had encountered. Changes like these are not easily explained. They do not arise from convenience, nor from gain. They take root in something that leaves a mark deep enough that it cannot be undone. And so, the testimony widens, from Mary in the garden, to two on a road, to a room behind closed doors, to the shore at dawn, to a gathering of hundreds, to a brother who had not believed, to a man who had resisted. Different settings, different conditions of heart, and yet a single thread running through them all. He appeared to them, and they did not remain the same. Before the final departure, there was a span of time that often passes quietly in the telling, yet carries its own weight. 40 days. Not a single appearance followed by absence, but a continued presence, measured, repeated, unfolding over time. The book of Acts describes it simply. He presented himself alive with many convincing proofs, appearing to them and speaking about the kingdom of God. There is a steadiness in that period. Conversations, explanations, meals shared again, moments in which what had been seen began to be understood. The shock of the first encounters gave way, gradually, to something more grounded. It was during these days that their understanding was opened. What they had heard before, what they had seen during those years with him, began to gather into coherence. The scriptures, once familiar yet not fully grasped, took on a clarity they had not known. It was not only that he was alive, it was that everything now pointed to him in a way they could finally see. From that place, the movement forward was given. On a mountain in Galilee, where he had directed them to go, the 11 gathered. When they saw him, they worshipped. And yet, even there, the text notes quietly that some still hesitated. It is an honest detail. Not everything had settled into certainty all at once. What stood before them was still larger than what they had known how to hold. And yet, it was to this group, marked both by recognition and by lingering questions, that he spoke. "All authority in heaven and on earth has been given to me." There is no strain in the statement. It is given as something already established. "Go, therefore, and make disciples of all nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father and of the Son and of the Holy Spirit, teaching them to observe all that I have commanded you. And then, the assurance that would remain with them beyond every place they would go. I am with you always, to the end of the age. The task was larger than they were. There was nothing in their position, no power, no structure, no reach that would suggest such a commission could be carried out by them alone. And yet, it was not given to those who had everything resolved, but to those who had seen enough to follow. From there, the final moment came. He led them out as far as Bethany, near the Mount of Olives. And as they stood together, he lifted his hands and blessed them. While he was blessing them, he was taken up. They watched as he was lifted from their sight, until a cloud received him, and he was no longer visible to them. It is a quiet departure, without spectacle, without finality in the way an ending is usually marked. They remained there, looking upward, holding the last moment as long as they could. And as they did, two men stood beside them in white and spoke. Men of Galilee, why do you stand looking into heaven? This same Jesus, who has been taken from you into heaven, will come in the same way as you saw him go. The ascension does not close the account. It leaves it open, but directed. The one who had appeared in the garden, on the road, in the room, by the sea, was not gone in the sense of absence. The promise remained, carrying forward what had already begun. And so they returned to Jerusalem, not with the silence of Saturday, not with the despair of Friday, but with a kind of quiet joy that did not depend on seeing him in that moment, because what they had already seen had settled something within them that would not be undone. To understand what these appearances meant in their own time, it helps to consider the world into which they were spoken. In the Greco-Roman world of the first century, the idea of a bodily resurrection was not something readily accepted. For many, especially among the educated, the soul might endure, but the body was something to be left behind. Matter was seen as lower, something from which one was released at death. To speak, then, of a body raised again not temporarily, not as a return to the same life, but as something enduring and complete was, in that context, difficult to receive. And yet, it was precisely this that was proclaimed, not in isolation, but in cities like Jerusalem, Athens, Corinth, and Rome, in places where ideas were tested, debated, dismissed, and sometimes received. When Paul stood in Athens and spoke of the resurrection, some listened with interest, some turned away, and some believed. The response was not uniform, but the message remained the same. It did not rest on a philosophical system or a refined argument. It rested on something those first witnesses returned to again and again in simple terms. We saw him, we heard him, we were with him, and we were not alone. From there, the question begins to take shape more clearly, not only as something historical, but as something that touches the nature of faith itself. Why were the appearances given in this way? Why not to Pilate, who had ordered the execution? Why not to the high priest, or to the council, or to those who had publicly opposed him? Why not in a setting that would have left no room for denial? The texts do not answer this directly, but the pattern suggests something. These appearances were not arranged to compel belief through overwhelming display. They did not remove the possibility of refusal. Instead, they formed witnesses, people who would carry what they had seen into a world where others would hear, consider, and respond. Faith in this sense was not forced, it was invited. There is an echo of this in a parable Jesus had told earlier, the story of the rich man and Lazarus. When the rich man asks that someone be sent back from the dead to warn his brothers, the answer he receives is quiet but firm. If they do not listen to what has already been given, they will not be persuaded even if someone rises from the dead. The resurrection does not act as a kind of pressure that removes all doubt. It meets the one who is open to receive it, and there, it transforms. It is also striking to consider what these appearances reveal about the character of the risen Jesus. He does not come with accusation. He does not begin by recalling their failure, their fear, their absence, their denial. He does not return to settle what had gone wrong. He comes with peace. That is how he speaks, again and again. Peace be with you. And from there, he restores, he calls, he sends. He meets Mary in her grief, not with explanation, but by speaking her name. He walks beside two who are leaving, opening the scriptures to them as they go. He stands among those who are afraid, allowing them to see and to come near. He receives Thomas without dismissal, offering him what he had asked for. He prepares a meal by the sea for those who have returned to what they knew, and there, he speaks to Peter in a way that brings him back without breaking him further. Each appearance carries a kind of attentiveness, not general, not distant, but shaped to the one who receives it. It is not difficult to see, then, why those who encountered him did not remain as they were. And it is here that the account, after tracing these moments, begins to turn gently towards something more personal, not away from what has been described, but through it. The question is no longer only what happened. It becomes, quietly, what do we do with this? What do we do with the testimony that he rose, that he appeared, that those who saw him were changed in ways that held even under cost and opposition? The question is not first about analysis. It is not even, at its core, about whether every detail can be resolved to satisfaction. It is, in the end, the same question that was asked by the sea, in a moment that was not public, not argued, not explained at length. Do you love me? It is a question that does not force itself forward, but once heard, is not easily set aside. And those who first heard it did not answer with words alone. They answered with the direction of their lives. The resurrection of Jesus does not stand as the closing of a story. It opens something that continues. Each appearance, whether in the garden, on the road, behind closed doors, by the sea, or on the mountain from which he ascended, was not only a moment in time, but a window. Through it, those who saw began to understand that what had seemed like an ending was in truth a beginning. Mary left the garden not with answers fully formed, but with something she could not keep to herself. Cleopas and his companion turned back along the road they had just walked, no longer weighed down, but carried forward by what had been made known to them. Peter stepped into the water without hesitation, drawn by a recognition that ran deeper than uncertainty. Paul set aside everything he had been certain of, not because it had been argued away, but because he had encountered something he could not deny. The movement that followed did not grow from a single idea carefully preserved. It moved through lives that had been changed. Ordinary people, fishermen, tax collectors, women who had known affliction, men who had known doubt, became witnesses. Not because they had sought that role, but because they had seen, and what they had seen remained with them. They did not present a theory. They spoke of an encounter, a fact, as Peter would later say, of which we are witnesses. And so the account continues, not only in what was written, but in what followed, across places, across years, across lives that took shape around that same testimony. It is not difficult to see how it reached outward. What is more difficult, perhaps, is to see how it comes near, because the one who called Mary by name, who walked beside two men on a quiet road, who stood among those who were afraid and spoke peace, who prepared a place by the water and waited for them there, is not presented as distant. He is not described as one who appeared once and was then gone in a way that leaves only memory. His words remain simple, and they do not strain to reach beyond their moment. I am with you always. And so what began that first day does not stand apart from the present. It continues in the same quiet way it began, through recognition, through response, through lives that are, in one way or another, turned. The question is not pressed, it is simply there, and like those who first heard it, each person, in time, answers it not only with words, but with the direction they take.